Okay, well, welcome everybody. Good evening, Erev Tov, and welcome. My name is Greg Bayless, and I'm head of school at the Toronto Heschel School, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome each and every one of you to tonight's conversation on why Jewish education matters, a panel discussion in honor of the visionary work and leadership of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha. We are thrilled to have so many guests joining us tonight from across the GTA, and thanks to the medium of the day, much further beyond. Tonight's event will be live streamed via Facebook with thanks to our media partner, the Canadian Jewish News. So, why does Jewish education matter? I remember a number of years ago, I attended an event called Choose Jewish, at which a very similar question was posed. Why choose Jewish education? And at the time, a gentleman, a tremendous supporter of Jewish education in the Toronto community, stood up and said, well, you might as well ask, why be Jewish? 20 years ago, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, with his mind fixed firmly on the future of the Jewish people, wrote a book as a wedding gift for his son. The book, addressed to his children and his future grandchildren, began with a chapter called Why Be Jewish? And it continued through evocative storytelling to depict the tremendous intellectual, ethical, social, and spiritual meaning that comes with living, learning, and teaching Jewishly. Rabbi Sacks, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, passed away this year. He left behind a remarkable legacy of teaching and public service, former chief rabbi of Great Britain, winner of the renowned Templeton Prize in Scientific and Spiritual Curiosity, publisher of books, articles, and debates on Jewish thought, and a wide array of topics from politics to science to leadership to theology and education. Being Jewish and Jewish teaching and learning were, for Rabbi Sacks, synonymous. Shortly after his death, an article appeared on the website of his office, published by Dr. Daniel Rose, collating and summarizing some of Rabbi Sacks's insights on Jewish education. Tonight's panel is inspired by the provocations of that article that invoke us to pose and respond to, as every generation must, the question, why Jewish education matters. Tonight, we have the privilege to be joined in conversation by 5 panelists, each of whom has contributed in significant and important ways to the holy work of Jewish education, here in Toronto, in the United States, in Australia, and in Israel. Some of whom have had the privilege of learning directly from Rabbi Sacks, with Rabbi Sacks, and many of us inspired by Rabbi Sacks. In alphabetical order, Dr. Daniel Held, Executive Director of the Julia and Henry Koschitzky Center for Jewish Education, UJA Federation of Greater Toronto, and a champion of Jewish education here in our community. Dr. Rabbi Benjamin Levy, Benji Levy, founding partner, Israel Impact Partners, past CEO of Mosaic United, joins us live and awake from Jerusalem, Israel. Benji, thanks so much for making the trip. We appreciate having you here. Dr. Rabbi Or Rose, Director, Miller Center for Interreligious Learning and Leadership, Hebrew College, Massachusetts, and author of one of my favorite books on Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. Rabbi Yael Splansky, Senior Rabbi of Holy Blossom Temple here in Toronto, and a visionary and leader of progressive Judaism here in Canada. And Dr. Rachael Turkienicz, founder and director of Rachael Center for Torah, Mussar, and Ethics, as well as the founding Judaic Studies Director of the Toronto Heschel School and one of my personal teachers. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us and sharing with us your reflections on Rabbi Sacks's work, as well as your own thoughts and ideas about why Jewish education matters. The format for tonight's discussion will be as follows. I have 7 questions, nice Jewish number, and hopefully we'll get to all of them. I will first address each question to 2 of the panelists in turn, after which I will invite any other panelists who would like to add some thoughts and ideas around the question. And at around 9:15, we'll open up the proverbial floor, the virtual floor, to questions from all of you out there. And we certainly welcome you to send in your questions. So let's jump in to our conversation. I'm going to be addressing the first question to Rabbi Splansky, followed by Dr. Turkienicz, and then anyone else who wants to jump in. So Rabbi Sacks wrote in the book that he dedicated to his children, he wrote that as they were about to gain their freedom from Egypt, the Israelites were told that they had to become a nation of educators. And in doing so, Sacks refers to a set of truly remarkable passages in the Torah, in Sefer Shmot, Sefer Devarim, which at the very moment that they prescribed to the Israelites the obligation to observe the rituals of Pesach, the formative rituals of the newly freed nation, those same texts raise the question or raise the notion that in the future, our children will ask us why we're doing this. What is this? What does this mean to you? Mazot lechem. These questions are familiar. They form the basis of the questions of the four children, Arbat Banim, of the Pesach Haggadah. Rabbi Splansky, it's a timely question. We're about to prepare for Pesach. In your view, what does this obligation, this dual commandment to both observe a core ritual and at the same time teach about its relevance place on us as Jewish parents and educators? What do you make of this requirement in every generation to respond to the question, Mazot, ma ha'avodah hazot lachem? What does this mean to you?
Thank you. So it's really a pleasure to be with the Heschel community again. I'm also a parent of 3 Heschel students, and I'm grateful to the faculty of teachers there who have helped to raise these terrific kids that Adam and I enjoy. And we miss being with the Heschel School every day. It's also a pleasure to be with this esteemed panel of Jewish educators and Jewish leaders. So thank you, Greg, for including me.
Thank you for being here.
So you asked many questions, all intertwined. I'm just going to tease out a few possible answers, and then we'll see where we go. So the primary mitzvah of the Seder is v'higadata, that you should tell the story. And so we need an audience. And so we prompt our children to prompt us with good questions so that we can fulfill the mitzvah of telling. And that's why we have all this crazy looking stuff on the table to prompt the questions. And the rabbis say, if you don't have anyone at your Seder table, if you're all alone there, then you should ask questions of yourself so that you can still fulfill the mitzvah of higadata, of telling the story. So one way of answering this question, lachem, ma ha'avodah hazot lachem, in relation to Jewish education and the choices that parents make, is that I think, we become better people when kids come into the picture, and we become better Jews when kids come into the picture, because we need to articulate for ourselves what matters to me most, what do I want to invest in, what are the values that shape my life, what are the commitments that I want to uphold. And so when we choose Jewish education for our kids, it's a way of saying, I'm choosing a life of Jewish learning, lifelong learning for myself. When we say we want our kids to be part of a Jewish school environment, we're saying I also want to be part of a Jewish communal life with its daily and weekly rhythms and patterns. So it's sort of a selfish choice that we make, right? In the best way possible, that we want to invest our children so that we can invest ourselves. One of the questions that you asked is about linking these two mitzvot, about observing the ritual and teaching its relevance. So what does that question, mazot, have to do with the theme of Pesach, Zman Cherutenu, and its freedom? And I would say that in order to ask just a simple question like mazot, what is this, is the stance of a free person, that only a free person can ask and inquire. A slave doesn't get to ask. A slave is told when to get up and what to eat and how to work, with or without straw, when to go to sleep. A free person and a free thinking person gets to ask questions. That's really the mark of a free person, is the asking. A slave is told, turn off your curiosity, keep your head down, do what the taskmaster tells you, and with any luck, you'll have another day. A free person is told, look up, lift up your eyes, look around, and walk with a stance of curiosity. So when parents choose Jewish education for their children, and the Heschel School in particular, they are training their children to inquire, to wonder, to embrace the freedom that is theirs through the discipline of asking good questions. And I want to point out that that parents are the primary teachers, of course, right? Morim, horim, it's the same word. And so what's the answer to the question, mazot? What is this? The answer is bechozek yad, with a mighty hand. God brought us out of the land of Egypt. So it could be that the parent would explain, well, this is the maror and this is the karpas, and I'll tell you all about these symbols. But instead, the answer is much more profound. When the child asks, what is this? The answer is, let me tell you a story. Let me tell you where we come from. Let me tell you to whom you belong. And with that answer, with that constellation of answers, we anchor our kids in their history. We anchor our children in their community. We give them confidence in their identity and what is theirs to claim. So those are some of my responses to your good questions, Greg.
Yeah, thank you so much. What I love about asking simple questions to rabbis is you get such rich answers and such unexpected pieces of wisdom. That piece on freedom and slavery and free thinking, had not thought of that, and that's beautiful. Thank you. Dr. Turkienicz, it's always harder to go second because the wisdom has been put out on the table, but I'm sure that you can add some wonderful thoughts to that. So how would you respond to this matter of this dual commandment of ritual and explanation, teaching?
Yes. So first of all, I'm very honored to go after Yael, after Rachael, Rabbi Splansky. Her thoughts are wonderful, and they really lay such a rich, fertile arena for exploring this. And the only things really I want to perhaps add into the mix is the idea that the question today that is being asked at the Seder is different than as it was written in the ancient world, which is the brilliance, of course, of our text, is that it means something new in each generation. And really the idea of Jewish education, in my opinion, is it heads to the area that Yael had mentioned. We could have talked about symbols on the table. We don't. We give profound answers. In other words, Jewish education, in my opinion, shouldn't head to what people can find on Google, because we'll find it on Google. It's you know, the information, the data, the resources, everything is at our fingertips. So that's not what we're being asked when we're asked those questions. When we look at, in particular, what you had mentioned about Rabbi Sacks and the idea that with this first ritual, we're being told to be the doer and to be the teacher. So we are to engage in it, but we should also be prepared to teach. And one of the challenges of teaching is that it pushes on your privacy, because students ask questions. And they ask a lot of questions, and we're telling them there are no boundaries to your questions, which means there are no boundaries to your questions, and we're going to get personal questions. And the idea of saying, well, if I am the teacher, then it is the essence of it, and I want to encourage questions, and they can get very personal. And so the idea of saying that we are being told, be prepared to be the teacher, be prepared that it's going to come at you. These questions are going to come at you. And when we look at the question that we're addressing, and it says, right, Ma ha'avodah zot lachem, what is this ritual to you? And that's where we're sort of going, oh, wait a second, I can give you information. Let me look up Google. I'll tell you where the ritual came from. I'll tell you what, but it's not what we were asked. We were asked, why are you doing it? What does it mean to you? And that's where we need to be prepared to be the teacher, because the question is a question of Judaism by merit. It's a question of saying, why would you do this? How does it improve your day? Why would I choose to do this? Why would I belabor myself this way to have to do this? And that's Jewish education at its core, is can I explain to a child why they would choose this? In a world of choices, why would you choose this? And the way that it's framed is beautiful because the child has asked me, why did I choose it? So I can sit there and now answer and say, here's what it's done to my life. Here's why this choice makes sense to me. And I make this choice every morning. Here's why I choose this. But at the end of that, my answer to address that question would be, but that's me. So let me ask you why you would do it. And now I want to include the child, but keep it personal, because my answer should not be the child's answer. It should be a frame that invites the child in. And now the child can explore from the inside, which is what Jewish education wants to do. So we really want to think of it in a much broader sense in today's world than to think of it as informational. Not to say the information is not important, of course it is, but we move beyond it with the question of the Haggadah, and we move beyond it with the way the Torah told us, okay, ready yourselves, be prepared for this. Those questions are going to get personal. Be prepared for personal answers. Don't skirt them, because if you skirt them, you've blocked the education. And so it's sort of warning us of, gird yourself. This is going to be a tough road ahead, and have your answers ready, because kids are absolutely going to sit there and say, why are you doing it? I want to know you. And that's where it cuts right to the core of that. And I think the question of Jewish education and the question of everything in today's world that is Jewish is to really address that question of, as you started, Greg, when you said, we might as well ask the question, why be Jewish? But we are asking that question. That is the question we are asking. And that is the question that is happening around our Seder tables. And it is the question of identity. And so we do need to ask, identity is personal. So I can share me with you and I can invite you in, but you have to find yours. And so my education of you is to help you, the child, understand why you would choose this in a world of infinite choice. Why would you choose this? And I call that Judaism by merit, and that Jewish education really approaches that level of what we want to impart to the child.
No, thank you. It makes me feel as though all of those obligations to set the table and have all the ritual pieces ready and the Haggadah and all, that's just like the start.
Yeah,
Then real work comes when you actually have to explain to your children why you personally do this and what your personal investment is,
yes.
And then invite them to do the same. It's a wonderful, wonderful thought. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, pleasure.
So I think I'm actually going to move on to the second question because we got such wonderful, full and rich responses from Rabbi Splansky and Dr. Rachael Turkienicz. So the second question is kind of related, and it's going to be addressed to Rabbi Benji Levy and then Dr. Dan Held, and it has to do with the Jewish calendar. So Pesach is coming up, and we recently celebrated Purim. And in his article with respect to Rabbi Sacks' ideas, Dr. Daniel Rose notes that Jewish life has rhythms. Weekly, monthly, annual cycles of Jewish life is what connects Jews around the world. Rabbi Sacks really elevates these cycles in his teachings and uses them as a vehicle for ongoing dialogue with Judaism's ancient texts, finding contemporary relevance in them week in and week out. And my question to you, Rabbi Benji, is about Jewish time. How does being immersed in Jewish time, which is different than secular time, I mean, you're in Israel and in many ways have the benefit of being much more in Jewish time, although even there, I think there's kind of both. But here in the diaspora, we really have to make a bit of an effort to be in Jewish time. So how does being immersed in Jewish time, knowing the Parsha, knowing the Hebrew date, being aware of the beginning and end of Shabbat, of Chagim, how does that enhance the life of children, their education, but also their spiritual life?
Well, thank you so much, Greg. And it really is a privilege and a pleasure to be here from Jerusalem, where Jewish time, as you said, has a whole different meaning. I remember a few years ago being in Australia as opposed to now being in Israel. And for example, Purim, just a few weeks ago, we experienced 3 days of Purim in Jerusalem, Purim Mishulash. And I just remember, walking to bring Mishloach Manot, and, hearing the singing all around and having these big vans playing music. It really, you really feel it in such a palpable way. I was actually privileged to have Rabbi Sacks write a foreword for an upcoming book that will be printed next year. And it's a book about Parashah and Chagim. It's about Jewish time. And he called his foreword The Music of the Jewish Year. He began it with a story that he was fond of from the 6th Lubavitch Rebbe. And basically the story talks about the Rebbe beginning with, we must live with the times. And his Hasidim are sitting around the table and say to him, what do you mean we should live with the times? That's what, our critics say. They say we're antiquated and we should get with the times. And he turned to them and he said, what I mean is that we must live with the Parashat HaShavua, the weekly portion of the Torah. And I really relate to this. As I was leading Moriah College in Sydney, Australia, no matter what the occasion, I found relevance in the Torah, in the layer of Jewish time. Rabbi Sacks said that Torah means teaching, instruction, guidance. Torah is a commentary on life, and life is a commentary on Torah. Together they constitute a conversation, each shedding light on the other. This makes us unique. It enhances the educational and spiritual life of a child because it brings Jewish education and spirituality to the life of a child, and it brings it to life. Our festivals, our parashah, and being immersed in Jewish time means that while the stories may have happened long ago, their meaning continues to gain new relevance. We are coming now to Pesach, which is a great example, and we just talked about some of that in terms of the mitzvah of Jewish education. This isn't about something that happened to our ancestors. We need to see ourselves going through the experience, as if we ourselves came out from Egypt. And I think ultimately, we're talking in the context of Heschel, one of the fine Jewish institutions and schools. And at the end of the day, this is how we keep our ancient religion young.
And do you think, I'll just ask you a little bit further on that, what do you think that sort of, I don't want to call it dissonance, but living in two time zones, I don't mean Israel and Australia, I mean for children, living in both secular time and Jewish time, how do you think that impacts them in terms of their development?
Look, I think actually there's a critical nature of the separation and the fact that they exist simultaneously. Because Rabbi Sacks was very fond of talking about a Judaism engaged with the world and a world engaged with Judaism. And one of the greatest ways to bring that to life is to live those two spheres and those two areas simultaneously. And I think it challenges each of our children, and quite frankly, it challenges each of us that, I walk outside and, the secular world, so to speak, the general world, may be experiencing just another day. But for me, it's Shabbat. The general world, I remember when I was walking home on Yom Kippur in Australia, and I was walking home from synagogue, and I wasn't that observant at the time. And I remember all the kids, it was between Mussar and Mincha, and we sort of had a little break. And I remember all the kids coming home from school with their school bags. And it was such a mundane, typical, normal experience as they were getting into their parents' cars. There was a school down the road from our home. And at the same time, here was me, dressed in white, not eating, not drinking, introspecting, being in this completely different zone. And I think that was in and of itself a unique time, i.e. where time meets, where secular general and Jewish time meets. That is a counterpoint because you've got two different layers of time. And the one opportunity is to experience the Jewish time in and of itself. And that's tremendously rewarding and amazing. Another is to experience general time in and of itself, which is tremendously rewarding and amazing. The challenge of Jewish life is what happens when the two meet and what happens when the two don't meet. And how do we negotiate that incredible experience?
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And it must be a real pleasure to be in Jerusalem in Jewish time. And I certainly can't wait for my next opportunity to do that. And hopefully I'll visit you when I'm there.
Looking forward.
Rabbi Benji, thank you so much. So Dr. Dan Held, so you're bringing up children in Jewish time. One of them is there with you, which is so lovely. What can you add to those thoughts around the importance of Jewish time and what that gives our children?
I think a lot about regular time, natural time, and unnatural time. So we are people of habit. We are people of rhythm. As a teacher, as a camp counselor, as a parent, I've learned the importance of a schedule, of a rhythm. Riva wakes up in the morning, knows that she needs to brush her teeth, have breakfast, get her boots on. Well, winter's almost over, no more boots soon, but go through a very regular rhythm of what the day looks like. We have breakfast, we have lunch, we have dinner. Camps operate in this way. Like, that's what life is. We have certain rhythms because we are people of habits. And in truth, most time is natural time. So a day is one revolution of the earth, right? A month is one revolution of the moon around the earth. A year is one revolution of the earth around the sun. I think I got all those right.
You're good.
But in many ways, Jewish time is unnatural time, especially Shabbat, right? There's nothing natural about 7 days other than the fact that it came from the Torah. And I think there's something powerful about those things that are unnatural and different. Riva is up late. It's 8:30. Her bedtime was a half hour ago. But there's something special and exciting and important about her being around for these conversations. And the Seder is the same thing. We keep them up late because we want to do something that is different. Shabbat is the same. We want to do something that is different. And I think there's something really powerful to the Jewish time, which is both different than the regular rhythm of time and the rhythm that we have in the street on an everyday, and is, like, I'm using a pun here, but wholly unnatural, which I think is really quite powerful. I'll just say one word about, like, where we are at this time in the last 12 months. When the government here in Ontario reopened schools, they also said in February, they also said they were delaying March break, right? March break just happens to be in March, right? This year, March break is going to be April break. And we asked the question to say, so do we need to do something about Pesach break? Because we don't have, our Jewish day schools live on a Jewish calendar, right? They have a break over Pesach, the days before, the days of Pesach. And we got this phenomenal response from our lawyer. We asked our rabbis, we also asked our lawyers, right? And the lawyer wrote a drush in his tshuva, in his opinion to us, speaking about the importance of religion and speaking about the importance of religious freedom and speaking about the importance of religious time and the dates in the calendar and how critical that is to us as a people and us as a Jewish people, but also us as society, to value how time is different. So I think both raising kids who live on a regular schedule, but also raising kids who see time as being special in their Judaism and unique and wholly unnatural, be it the weekly rhythm of Shabbat, or be it the way that we stay up late for Seder or for events like tonight, I think are really helpful for us to think about sort of our unique stone in the cultural mosaic of our society.
It's wonderful. Two things came to mind as you were speaking. One is that there seems to be maybe some relationship almost to critical thinking, or the ability to think beyond by understanding the distance between these two times. And the other one that struck me was the sense of agency one has when one participates in Jewish ritual, when you are, in a sense, I mean, you're not determining the time's in the calendar, but when you light those candles, you are owning that time. And I think both those, that sense of agency and critical thinking, have something to do with what you talked about in the not the unnatural, like it's not just what's happening. I'm actually doing something, and I'm, taking this time into my own hands to some extent with the community, which is beautiful. Thank you. I'm going to just keep on going with the questions, I think, because we have some wonderful questions, and we're just getting some beautiful answers from each of our initial two respondents. So we're going to move from time and regular time, we might say, to a more abstract concept, I guess, or maybe not so abstract. Maybe it's got a lot of very real relevance, which is the concept of tikkun olam. And I'm going to address this question first to Rabbi or Rose, and then to Dr. Turkienicz. So writing about the concept of tikkun olam, Rabbi Sacks wrote that to be a Jew is to be asked to give, to contribute, to make a difference, to help in the monumental task that has engaged Jews since the dawn of our history, and to make in the world a home for the divine presence, a place of justice, compassion, human dignity, and the sanctity of life. So, Rabbi or Rose, how do you understand this obligation of Tikkun Olam? What exactly is it? And how does a Jewish education help children understand and contribute to Tikkun Olam, whatever that is?
Thank you very much, firstly, for the invitation to be a part of this wonderful discussion. As a Canadian, I was born and raised in Winnipeg. This feels like something of a homecoming, even though Toronto, as you all call it, was the big city. So it is an honor indeed. And as some of you know, I worked at the Abraham Joshua Heschel School in New York City for many years. It was, in fact, my first job. So I'm proud to be a part of this conversation and honored, especially to be doing so in memory of Rabbi Sacks.
Welcome, and I just want to say we love Winnipeggers at the Toronto Heschel School. We have many Winnipeggers. There's just some spiritual connection between Winnipeg and Heschel. So welcome.
So in answering your question or beginning to address it, I want to turn to a midrash that Abraham Joshua Heschel loved. It's a midrash from Bereshit Rabbah, and the context for the midrash is essentially the question of why Abraham, why Avraham, as the first great iconoclast? Why is it that Avraham was summoned? And so the rabbis, filling gaps as they do so beautifully, imagine a whole backstory, right? They tease out and weave together a wonderful biography of Abraham. And in this particular midrash, the voice of the rabbinic editor likens Abraham to whom? To a person that wanders from place to place. And along that winding road, as this journeyman is making his way, he comes upon a palace or a temple or a citadel. And it's described in the Midrash as a birah doleket, which can be read in at least two different ways. Conventionally, it's read as a palace or a castle that is aflame. But it can also be read, as Heschel and his Hasidic forebears read it, as a palace that is aglow. And the Midrash then unfolds in such a way that the person who sees this phenomenon stops and says, is there no master to this domain, to this great palace or citadel? And a voice calls out and says, I am the master, right? The Baal Habirah. And the reason that I find this midrash to be so powerful is because in order to address the issue of Tikkun Olam, one has to see and feel, taste and touch both the beauty of the world and the brokenness of the world. And both are true, always. And so one can read that midrash as the description, a very painful description, of a world that is on fire. It is ablaze. Or one can read it as the world is aglow. And both are true simultaneously. Very interestingly, in that midrash, the Baal Habirah calls out and makes his presence known, but doesn't put out the fire or doesn't carry the light forward. And the way that I understand that midrash is that is an invitation. That is an invitation to humankind to be engaged in the ongoing process of creating a just, compassionate, and sustainable world. And as the rabbis describe it, we are called to be shutafim. We are called to be partners in this unfolding act of creation. and it is always both beautiful and broken. And then the question is, how are you going to respond? So thinking about this educationally, pedagogically, one of the questions that Heschel and Sacks and others have asked so eloquently is how to engage young people within Jewish educational frameworks in having and cultivating that sensitivity, right? Heschel talked, of course, endlessly about awe and wonder and responsibility. That is, experiencing awe and wonder are not the end of the religious experience or the goal of the religious life. That is the stimulus. And then the question is, so what are you going to do about it? And that's a complicated lifelong journey that involves, as we've learned perhaps this year more so than we understood in decades, the interrelationship of all of life and the ways in which we are interdependent. Heschel, as you recall, wrote a famous essay in the mid-1960s called No Religion is an Island, which was delivered as an address at Union Theological Seminary. And of course, what he was articulating through that metaphor was that we need each other. And in order to gather up the nitzotzot, the sparks of divinity, we need to recognize the state of our world. We need to also understand more profoundly than often we do the pain of others and what it is that inspires them to create beauty. And the pandemics, and there are multiple pandemics happening simultaneously. The virus of Corona-19, the ongoing racial virus, what Heschel described as an eye disease in his first meeting with Dr. King in 1963, and the socioeconomic battering of people that are often marginalized, left out, and forgotten. And so we are called. And the Mekubalim, the Kabbalists, are very daring. They are so daring as to say that after the Shvirah, right, in the myth of Isaac Luria, after that breakage, it is humankind that is called upon to put the pieces together. And in fact, one of Luria's great students, in sharing those teachings, Chaim Vital says, the potential that we have is to not only repair the world, but to restore the luster to the divine countenance. To restore the luster to the divine countenance. For reasons we don't understand, that is beyond our fathoming, the world that we live in is beautiful and broken. And the ways of the divine are mysterious. And we are responsible. I'll pause there.
Yeah, no, so many big and important and significant things that you said there. And I think that the takeaway for me, and I was thinking about my own children around this, is the word "and" that you use. That from this kind of Jewish perspective of Tikkun Olam, my own teenage daughter says, Abba, like, we've got some big problems. And sometimes it just feels so overwhelming. And I think what you just said, let's remember that the world is broken and beautiful. And we are responsible, and we also get to enjoy it. Like that and, is really sticking with me. I'd love to hear what Dr. Turkienicz has to say about this. She's done some work with our staff on the concept of Tikkun Olam, which I remember very well. And I'd like to hear, but Rabbi Rose, thank you. I'm going to be thinking about a lot of those comments.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Rabbi Rose. Beautiful, beautiful comments. When we talk about Tikkun Olam, the very first question is going to be, why are we repairing the world? How did it break? And it actually raises a theological question of, if God can do anything, why didn't God create a world that wouldn't break? So did God do me any favors by creating a universe, putting me in it and saying, by the way, it's broken, and, could you take a minute and fix it? So, it raises a lot of these theological questions. And the way that I like to approach the concept of tikkun olam is to think of Rubik's cubes. For anyone who remembers, I think they've done a sort of a nostalgic comeback into today's world with Rubik's cubes. I grew up with Rubik's cubes. The thing about Rubik's cubes and the studies about Rubik's cubes are that, and for anyone who doesn't know, they're squares where you rotate the sides to get all the sides to be the same color. Studies have been done on Rubik's cube, and apparently children could solve it more easily than adults. And so huge studies were why. I mean, you would think that, an adult would do it, a child would make a mess of it. The key was that the key to the Rubik's Cube is, in order to get to the next stage, you have to break what you just accomplished. So if you get one side the right color, and now you want to get two sides of the right color, you have to mess up that side that you just actually fixed in order to do the next stage. Children will do that, and adults won't. Adults will sit there and say, are you kidding? It took me an hour to get that side. I'm not touching that side. And so the reason that I bring this as an example for tikkun olam is because the process of completing it involves breakage. So it's not that God gave me a defective world. It's that the process of creating involves breakage points. That when we talk about how would the infinite ever manifest in the finite, the infinite is going to break the finite. And now we have the Rubik's Cube. Now we have that idea that for me to function in this thing, it, by definition and process, I am inheriting something that has breakage, because that is the process of creating a universe. The honor of it is for God to turn to humanity and say, will you be my partner? Because you are in it, and I am around and above and infused through it. And together we could actually complete this vision. And that's the honor of it. And that's the incredible elevation of it, is that humanity has been honored and charged to be the partner. And so we are in engaging with tikkun olam, we're actually engaging and accepting the responsibility to complete the vision, to participate in the vision. And it's always the end of that sentence. So where I often hear people talk about tikkun olam, but not completing the sentence, which is l'taken olam l'malchut shaddai. There's an end to that sentence. And the end of the sentence says, would the creator, would the visionary be comfortable here? The one who designed, the one who had the grand vision, the one who began all of this and said it and chose me as a partner. Could I bring it to the point where that visionary would be proud to attach their name to this completed vision? That's my goal, is to say, would God be comfortable here? Or have I done nothing to repair this? In fact, I've contributed to the damage. I've stayed silent while others were contributing to the breakage, to the point where then I sit there and say, where's God? But the answer is, well, where do you expect God to be? There's a process that you were asked to step up to. So that idea of tikkun olam isn't the sense of the world broke somehow. God created a perfect world. We broke it, and now we have to fix it. That's the concept, the Jewish concept of accountability. If I harm something, I need to fix it. That's not tikkun olam, that's accountability. Tikkun olam is my partnership with God. And it's the idea of saying there is a vision. I want God as the creator, the designer, the grand infinite being of all of this to feel comfortable here. And so I am partnered for that goal. The place that I think it's crucial for Jewish education is to understand the holiness of it. When we talk about repairing the world, we are not talking about environmentalism. Jewish environmentalism is something else. It's there, it's huge. It may cross in and intersect, but it does not define tikkun olam. And so the idea of teaching children through Jewish education that, and again, picking up that idea that it is broken and beautiful, that the fact that things don't work the way they should or things are broken does not mean we've been defeated. It means sometimes it's the nature of things. The Talmud at one point says that part of Jewish education, this one rabbi says, is give your toddlers things they can break, because so much is learned when you just drop something and watch it break. And now you've learned about gravity. And now you've learned about, even if I put it back together, it's never going to be exactly the way. Look how much we've learned because something broke. So the idea of being able to say we learn from Tikkun Olam, it's a huge opportunity. Also, Jewish education through Tikkun Olam allows us to give a child a global view. It allows to pull beyond the Jewish people, beyond the Jewish community, beyond the Jewish perspective, to really expand it globally, and to talk about humanity, and to talk about these international issues, and to talk about the world and the things that we see throughout the world. It creates a global vision. It also invites the child to understand allyship, to understand, how do I ally with a group that isn't my group? Because together we do more Tikkun Olam. And now there's that invitation and the Jewish direction for extending a hand to another group and say, I'm not just going to support your cause, I want to hold your hand and ally with you, because the world will be a more repaired and better place when we join our forces together. And Tikkun Olam is the road in for the child.
Rachel, it's beautiful. I was thinking as you were speaking that, when children break things, we want to protect them all the time. And, it's not the end of the world. As you're thinking, saying, no, it's not the end of the world. It's the beginning of the world. Right? Yeah. That allowing for there to be mistakes and errors and breakage and experimentation, in all areas of the curriculum, math, science, whatever, writing, errors, it's all part of it. And then and that other beautiful thing that you said about there being a purpose, a much bigger purpose, and not being for myself, but for the other, really, for God. So beautiful. Thank you. As you were speaking, I was thinking about how this idea of brokenness and tikkun is relevant across the curriculum, frankly. And it's a nice segue in a way to our next question, which has to do with integration. Where is it? Over here. Yes, it has to do with integration. And actually, I wanted to start this question with you, Rachael, and then Rabbi Benji Levy. So here at the Toronto Heschel School, we're very interested in what we call integration, the integration of Jewish and secular studies as part of our staff training. I often draw my staff's attention to what Rabbi Sacks has said about integration. In fact, in our training manual, we have this piece of text from Rabbi Sacks, which says that if you're studying art, integrate that in your Jewish work. If you're studying economics or math, let's say, or moral philosophy, integrate that. Try to make sure that the same intelligence that you or your students are using in their secular studies, they're using in their Jewish studies, and weaving them together. And don't forget that in Judaism, we believe that the God of revelation is also the God of creation. So all of the secular studies that your students are studying about creation or nature must dovetail with what they're studying in Torah. Assume they're integrated. So I recall you once saying in a staff seminar that you gave many, many years ago, God is in the math. God is in the math. And I remember a student of ours, I think she was in grade 3 at the time, commenting on how the silent E in spelling is like God. Its presence changes everything. How does teaching through an integrated model where so-called secular topics and Jewish learning are interwoven, how does that heighten learning?
Huge question.
Yes, sorry.
How to be able to address it in a timely fashion. And I loved your examples. The example of the student talking about the silent E. Actually, that occurred when it was in a class about Purim. So it wasn't even a spelling class. It was a class about Purim. And I was teaching about Purim. And the question that came from the students was, they said to me, Maura, Rachel, you forgot to mention God. And I said, no, actually, I did not forget to mention God. God is not mentioned once in the Megillah. And then I said, why do you think that is? And that's when I got that beautiful gem. It's like the silent letter in the word. You don't hear it, but it has to be there and you know it's there. And that's a beautiful example that I always use of integrated education. The idea that, and if I back up for a moment, one of the things I learned when I was a student in university and I started to study education, and this stuck with me always. I was told, always remember, we don't teach subjects, we teach children. And it really has resonated with me always. We don't teach subjects, we teach people. And the goal of education is to take the information and have the student integrate it into their personhood. And they will struggle with it and it will find a place, or it won't find a place, or they'll reject it, but they'll always know it. It will always be informing them, because education is about integration. It's not about programming a computer. I'm not teaching a subject. I'm not teaching math or geography. I'm teaching a child. And the idea of the personhood of that child is where my attention is. When we talk about integrated education, we're talking about creating a holistic identity. We're talking about the integration to the child would be that one part of the child understands and speaks with another part of the child, which understands and informs another part of the same child, so that we're creating this holistic and integrated personhood. And that is the goal of education. We don't want to create compartmentalization within a person. We might want to teach them how they would do that. If they ever felt there was a moment in life they would want to do that, but that's because that's a choice of skill, not the person. We don't want to create a person who is, oh, I'm Jewish till 10, and then I'm not. And then I'll be secular maybe till 3, and then kicks in again, I'll be Jewish through dinner. That's compartmentalization, and it doesn't really work for anyone. The idea of integrating the study means that when I look at things like Torah, part of Torah education is the values. Very few places these days are going to say Jewish education and Torah education means you've memorized that verse and you can now say it back to me. And again, I'm back to my point about anything I can get on Google, I'm going to go to Google and get. So the idea that when I'm teaching Torah, I will head to the values. And I want those values to speak to the child, and I want the child to integrate those values and struggle with them. And Jewish education in adolescence around the bar and bat mitzvah age is crucial, because adolescents are programmed to rebel. We all need to rebel. That's how we find our voice. That's how we find our personhood. I want to teach the child, rebel in the text. Get right into that text and listen to those arguments. Listen to these commentators. Go at each other. They're rebelling. Rebel with these values. Struggle with them. Find your voice internally, and then struggle with those values, and eventually it will find its place. And then I want those values to speak to your secular studies. I want you to have included all of that into your personhood, so that actually you're creating your voice. And it's one voice. It's not each different voice for each different compartment of my identity. I want one voice. And that voice is the integration and struggle of all these things together until it becomes my voice. Why is that something that is so important in a Jewish world? Why is that something where I would say that a child coming out of Jewish education, I would want to see this in them? Is because otherwise they can't engage with secular problems. Secular problems become, oh, that's not my problem. Oh, were there Jews involved in that? There were no Jews involved in that? Oh, that's not my problem. Because we've created compartments. But to be able to take the Torah values and say, was there suffering there? That is your problem. And do you know where that country is? Because now you have to go to your secular studies to make sure you know where that country is. And do you understand how the politics work? Because now you have an avenue in to have your voice speak into the political arena that can address that suffering, because all of me is speaking with my voice. And for me to teach the child to do that, I need to teach the child how they find those connections to integrate all that education, to create their unique voice, and now express those Torah values.
Sounds like what you're saying is if you want an integrated person, then you need an integrated education, because the way in which you educate is really what's going to develop the person.
Yes, and it's the way you're modeling it as well. So an integrated curriculum and an integrated model of education around will show the child that, wait a second, their math teacher is talking about a Torah value from Parshat Shavua. Why is the math teacher talking about Parshat Shavua? And now they're seeing it. And so it really creates that model and that expression that now they're learning how to do it.
Yeah, no, thank you, Rachael. That's wonderful. Benji, Rabbi Benji Levy, I feel like when you came to visit us, I thought it was 3 years ago, but you told me it was more like 8 years ago. So that we talked a lot about integration. It was one of the areas that I think I recall you being very excited about, if I'm not mistaken, at least about that part, if I'm mistaken about the time. Is that correct, first of all? And second of all, what are your thoughts about this matter of integration?
Look, first of all, 100% it's correct. I actually met you when I came to the school to learn specifically about integration. That was the purpose of my visit to the Heschel School. And I ended up writing a piece about it for your magazine, Think. And before I relate to that, I just want to mention what Dr. Rachael said, which is so beautiful. And I want to, really add that, this is an integration experience for each of us, meaning that we're coming from such different worlds. I've got a very different accent, a different time zone. And yet we're integrating those world experiences in what we're discussing. You think about what Rabbi Rose said about when Heschel met with King and talked about the eye disease of racism. And you think about the history involved in that. You think about its relevance today. You think about what Dr. Rachael just said, citing a psychological study on a Rubik's Cube, and how that relates to what it means to tikkun olam. So every single thing that we do is really a form of integration. And I think what she said at the end about modeling it, this is the ultimate model of it. And I think Heschel bringing this type of experience to the Jewish community of Toronto and beyond is really a modeling of that. And it makes me excited for the students that get to really be involved in that. So when I was walking through the hallways of the school, I saw beautiful displays of the students' work. And I wrote this in the piece because one item that caught my eye was entitled Sydney, Australia. Now, when you're walking in Toronto and you see Sydney, Australia, and you just came from there, it catches your eye. And there was 2 colorful clocks that were surrounded by several other clocks with similar dials. And they reflected times all around the world. So I looked closer because I wanted to see what the time was in Australia. And, when I looked closer, I noticed the artwork on each of the dials. And they were punctuated by Roman numerals reflecting different halachically significant times that delineate the Jewish day. And that included the time one may begin to pray Kriyat Shema, to recite the Shema prayer. Because as we know, there's specific times when you can have Shacharit, specific times for Mincha, specific times for Mariv, specific times within the Shacharit time that you can have Shema, specific times where you get 2 different types of mitzvot for the Shema. And the clocks, were part of a maths activity. And it was a summative assessment to appreciate multiplication and division relating to time. But it was simultaneously an activity in art, in geography, and it was a profound lesson in rabbinics. In creating their clocks, the students became engaged in the mechanics and significance of what Jewish time really is about, all in an innovative and meaningful way. And we talked right at the beginning of this conversation, the first question you asked me actually related to Jewish time, and Rabbi Sacks' discussion about how this is the music of our experience. And that sense of Jewish time, I gave you the example of Yom Kippur when I was walking home and I saw these kids from a school called Kambala, which was a non-Jewish school, that were walking into, coming into their parents' car at the end of school. And I was walking home between Mussar and Mincha. And I think that experience would have been lost if it wasn't integrated, which means that I was walking home from one of the only times when you don't really integrate in the most classic sense of the word. Yom Kippur is all about us wearing white, being in shul, not engaging in worldly matters, not engaging in food and drink. It's trying to separate us as much as we can. And even on that day, I walked home and was exposed to the most mundane worldly matters. And what that did to me was forced me to reflect and introspect on what I do with worldly matters. If today in Yom Kippur, I'm looking at it in this way, then how do I bring that into my life? This passing time where I come home from school and I go into the car, how do I deal with these mundane experiences? And it relates actually to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his child. We're coming up to Lag BaOmer in a few weeks, in a month and a half. And basically, after 12 years immersed in just the spiritual, they came out and they saw someone engaging in such physical activity, and their eyes burnt what was going on because they could not integrate. They were too stuck in the holy. Today, I think we're too stuck in the secular, in the profane, and we need to integrate the two. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot gives a beautiful idea, famous idea, which seems to go to the opposite of the idea of integration, where it says one who walks on the road and studies and interrupts their studies to say, how beautiful is this tree, how beautiful is this plowed field. Scripture considers it as if they've forfeited their life. So ostensibly, it reads that the person should not have stopped their learning to marvel in their surroundings, right? Why they're stopping the learning to see the tree. But I think what it's really saying is the opposite. Seeing the tree is part of the learning, and learning is seeing the tree. So what it's saying is that when one looks at the natural world as disconnected from Torah, one is doing a disservice to the world and a disservice to Torah. So Ben Bagbag says also in Pirkei Avot, hafoch bo tekula bo, that you should delve into the Torah and delve in it, for everything is in it. Just like everything can be found in the Torah can be found in everything. And students today need to leave the silos and be exposed to this beauty so that they can live the imperative articulated in the Proverbs, in all your ways know him. So it's like now more than ever, we need to reframe the way we learn and we live. To paraphrase Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, I spoke before about how he talks about Jewish time. This week we celebrate his 73rd birthday, which he would have turned 73 this week. And this panel is dedicated to him. And one of the most profound things he said in my mind was that when it comes to the world today, the words need to stay the same, but we need to change the tune. We must focus on re-engaging the students with new mediums, anchored in Torah values and an active Jewish life. And I believe that integration is one of the key techniques to be able to do this. And the Toronto Heschel School is an exemplary institution, and that is truly leading the way.
Thank you for that. And just hearing you talk about it kind of like re-inspires me in why this is such an important venture. So toda rabah.
Well, that inspiration comes from your inspiration to us.
There you go. It's all integrated. That's how it. So at the core of Jewish teaching is, of course, Jewish teachers. And Rabbi Sacks espoused tremendous respect for Jewish teachers. Teachers, he wrote, open our eyes to the world. They give us curiosity and confidence. They teach us to ask questions. They connect us to our past and our future. They're the guardians of our social heritage. He wrote, we have lots of heroes today, and they are often celebrities, athletes, supermodels, media personalities. They come, they go, they have their 15 minutes of fame. But the influence of a good teacher stays with us. They are the people who shape our life. And the quote reminds me of Rabbi Heschel's notion of text people when he writes that what we need more than ever is text people, not just textbooks. And I wanted to ask Dan Held and then afterwards Rabbi Splansky about this matter of Jewish teachers. So Dan, I'll start with you because you encounter many teachers in your work and your daily work. What's the significance of a Jewish teacher? What does it mean to be a Jewish teacher? Or to use Heschel's expression, a text person?
I've been thinking a lot about last spring when our kids were home, and with Pesach coming up, I remember that Pesach of we thought it was going to be 5 weeks until, from the time we closed our schools physically in March until after Pesach, it'll be 5 weeks with the kids home. And it wasn't. It was a lot longer. And I remember one Friday afternoon going for a bike ride with Riva and her younger sister, Gabriella. And we paused by the side of our path because we had an appointment for a phone call with Riva and her teacher. And so much of those months were not just about the learning math, the learning Hebrew, the learning Tanakh, the learning Parsha, but they were actually about what it meant for teachers to usher children through very narrow times. They were about the whole child, not just the curriculum. And Rachel, I went to the same teachers college as Rachel, right? We learned that we weren't teaching subjects, we were teaching children. And I think there was something incredibly powerful about that phone call we got on that Friday afternoon, and then many other phone calls, and the parade that of teachers who went in front of our class or went in front of our house before Shavuot for our youngest kid, who was, I don't know, 1 at the time, to celebrate with her in the days leading up to Shavuot. Because in those moments, the teachers weren't just teaching subjects, they were teaching kids to be resilient in very, very difficult times. And I think that's something which is what we mean by text people, because they aren't just teaching about books and the stuff that you can find in books or the things you can Google or find on your phone. They're teaching us how to be people based on text. I also just want to juxtapose this conversation with an earlier one we had about creating the nation of educators. Because on one hand, we have teachers who are the pedagogues and who are trained in that and who do this day in and day out. But I also think one of the things that Rabbi Sacks teaches us, and certainly Rabbi Heschel and others, is that we all need to be that nation of educators. And it's about, us as parents. It's about, I'm now speaking for myself because I used to be a teacher and now I'm a policy guy sitting in an ivory tower, right?
You're still a teacher, Dan. You're still a teacher.
Thank you. I will take it and I will love that. But we really do need to be the nation of educators, where every single individual, every parent, every grandparent, every sibling, every older sibling, every camp counselor is that educator. And I think much of what we've done with education in the 20th century was building the institutions, right? The synagogues and the camps and the JCCs and the day schools and the places where we had these institutions. And what we're seeing in the nascent years of the 21st century is that re-implanting of the nation of educators. And we think about sort of PJ Library and the books that my kids get every month, and curling up with them to read these books, and parents become that educator and kids ask the Jewish questions. And we're rethinking what it means to be that nation of educators. And I think events like tonight speak to that special role of Jewish schools to help parents and grandparents and community members be the nation of educators taught by the text people how to do that.
Shkoach, thank you. So I want to ask one last question, but before I do that, I want to hear from Rabbi Yael her thoughts on the Jewish teacher, because she's also encountered many Jewish teachers, and she herself is a Jewish teacher. What's the role of the teacher, the Jewish teacher?
So I would say that one way we know a teacher is a text person is that their students talk about them. And Abraham Joshua Heschel was a text person, and I know that because his students, including my grandfather, spoke about him. So I know some things about Abraham Joshua Heschel because my grandfather and my grandmother, who was also his student, told me. And they had a very special relationship. Hebrew Union College, the Reform Seminary in Cincinnati, Ohio, plucked Heschel up and plucked my grandfather up from Nazi Europe, and they formed a special bond from that experience. So when my grandparents got engaged and my great-grandparents were still locked behind the gate, keeping them in Germany, Heschel felt sorry for my grandfather, his student, and threw an intimate engagement party for them. And my grandmother told me that he put myrtle branches on the table. So every detail of that gesture, of that loving, kind gesture, was remembered and retold 2 generations later. And now I tell my kids 3, 4 generations later. So Heschel was a text person, and my grandfather modeled himself after Heschel, as many did, so that when Heschel went to Selma to march, my grandfather went to Selma to march. And actually, we heard earlier about 63 when Heschel and King met. It was my grandfather who introduced them in Chicago at that conference for race and religion. My grandfather was one of the 4 clergymen who led that convention. So my grandfather said this. He was a congregational rabbi, and he said this about writing eulogies for his congregants. And I didn't learn this from him directly. I learned it from my father, who learned it from my grandfather, another chain of text people and students telling the texts of their teachers' lives. How does it go? My grandfather said, a rabbi is supposed to teach text, right? So when you give a eulogy, teach the text of the person's life. There is something to be learned from every human life lived, whether it was how to work hard, or how to be generous, or how to be faithful, or how to have a sense of humor. There's always something that can be taught from the text of one's life. So it's a little bit risky to be a text person. It takes some courage to expose yourself in that way, to study and to being commented upon and spoken about. But the best teachers are willing to go there. And I know that the Toronto Heschel School faculty includes many teachers who are text people and willing to take that risk with their students. I know that because my kids would talk about them. And still to this day, they're longtime graduates and they still will quote their teachers from long ago. So the finest teachers make themselves to be text people, and moreover, the finest teachers recognize that their students are also text people, that their students should be studied and interpreted and commented upon. And I know that the teachers at the Heschel School see in their students text people, because when my husband and I would go for our parent-teacher interviews, every time we'd walk out of the room and say, boy, that teacher really knows our kid. That teacher really gets our kid, our funny, smart, quirky kid. So I think it has a lot to do with autobiography and willingness to expose your story, share your text, and let it be studied and known and told and retold by your students. And then it also, teachers are also heroic text people, in that they're able to see that their students are also text people, and honor that in each one of their students.
That's a beautiful thought, that second thought about seeing children as text people. Thank you. I'm gonna remember that one for sure. So the last question I want to ask, I said I would ask 7, but I'm only going to get to 6, because the world is not finished, and we will have another opportunity. And I do want to leave some time for people out in the audience who've joined us to ask some questions. And I think I'll ask this question only to the first respondent for the sake of time. So I'm going to address this question to Rabbi Or Rose, and it's a tricky question, but a really, really important one. So a question that comes up for many people when they think about Jewish education is how a Jewish education teaches us to think about the other Jews, and others who are not Jewish, from different faiths and different backgrounds. And Rabbi Sacks was very clear on this. He wrote, "A test of faith is whether I can make space for difference. Can I recognize God's image in someone who is not in my image, whose language or faith or interpretation of faith, I'll add, or ideals are different from mine?" So, Rabbi Rose, how does an immersive Jewish education, where students may encounter other cultural groups or faiths, or even other Jews, frankly, less frequently perhaps, because they're immersed in this wonderful Jewish education that they're getting, how can that still, or even more perhaps in some ways, or in interesting ways, nurture children's skills or capacities or proclivities to recognize God's image in someone who is not in my image, whose language, faith, ideals are different from mine? How does that work, and what does that look like in your view?
Thank you for the softball question.
Yeah, well, you knew it was coming.
I did indeed, and I welcome it because it's really my avodah in the world. This is a labor of love that I'm involved with day to day. The beginning of my answer is actually to return to the Talmud, to one of the most well-known passages in contemporary Jewish life. And it's the story about the students of Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. And there is a reason why some texts are classics. And as you might recall, the students in these two great academies disagree vehemently about a particular halachic issue. And at a certain point in their intensive deliberations, a voice from the heavens calls out, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chaim. These and these are both the words of the living God, which is enough to contemplate for a lifetime. Which is to say, of course, we need to instill in ourselves and cultivate in our students a sense of epistemological humility. None of us possesses ultimate truth. If we did, we would be God. And Rabbi Sacks says that very beautifully, quite bravely, in The Dignity of Difference. God is greater than any religion. And you hear echoes of Dr. Heschel and others in those words. So to begin with, I think one of the pedagogic goals is for us to embody that principle of anava. And that means that we are all in process. We are all learners. We are all aspiring to be talmidei chachamim, which means we are not chachamim, but talmidei chachamim, that we are students. And that's important to remember. And it's also important in this context, and I wanted to add this earlier, to allow questions to remain. Heschel spoke about depth theology. And I think as educators, with the best of intentions, myself included, we want to fill those gaps. We want to dive in and provide answers. But the questions themselves, as we approach Pesach, are absolutely vital. And humility and allowing for questions, for mystery to abide are parts of what I think are necessary to become a mature spiritual seeker, learner, and teacher. The second half of that teaching then builds upon the first, which is to say, again, the editorial voice of the Talmud asks, but why then are the teachings of Hillel those that carry the day, halacha lema'aseh, 9 times out of 10? That is, we have to live in this material world and we have to make decisions. We can't simply, abide in question, mystery, and paradox. We have to orient, move, build, grow, and develop. And the answer is a profound one, and it doesn't get tired. The answer is that these students were modest. They were respectful enough of their interlocutors to actually articulate their positions before their own. And one can read that in a kind of tit for tat manner. Oh, I can repeat back to you very quickly your response so I can dismiss it. I would prefer to read it as carefully listening and then articulating to the best of one's ability with dignity what the other person said, and then with honesty, articulating why he or she feels differently. So kindness, modesty, and the sense that you are engaged in a holy act. And yes, machlokot, disagreements, are a part of trying to shape a world. It's a part of that breakage that Rachael referred to before. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav has a beautiful teaching in which he says, Talmidei Chachamim need to disagree, because in doing that, they're actually imitating God. It's an act of imitatio Dei. Because after all, how did God begin the creation? With breakage, with a shvirah. And we need to therefore take sides, right? There can't be space for a new creation unless we take sides. So all of that is to say, I think that in the classrooms, in the hallways, in the gym, in the lunchroom, the ethos of a kind of spiritual humility that's accompanied by a willingness to engage in serious and thoughtful agreement and disagreement are vital components of developing a pluralistic posture, both intra-Jewish and interreligious. I do want to say, I think that we as Jewish educators need to do better at having our students engage regularly with people from other walks of religious and secular life. And that has to be woven into the fabric of our education, because otherwise it's a special event. But life is not a special event, and life is lived in the fullness of the diversity of humanity. And if we truly want to integrate in the ways that all of us have tried to articulate, there have to be regular and substantive encounters with people who are similar and different to us. And I think both Heschel and Sacks, in their own ways, really had great respect for holding the tension of particularism and universalism. And they both believe that out of a thick engagement with Jewish text and tradition, one could come to the table, as it were, with others, proudly, but also openly. And the ultimate answer is God is greater than any one religion. And of course, it's easier said than done. And we all know too that sometimes the most difficult conversations are with those that are closest to us. That is, the intra-Jewish conversations, debates, disagreements can often be more painful, in part, frankly, because we're not on our best behavior in those contexts, because there's a certain kind of familiarity, and right, the stakes are somewhat different. But I think that if I can prod a little bit, in the vein of a Heschel or a Sacks, I don't think we're doing well enough, frankly, with interreligious, cross-cultural, interethnic, interracial education that are born out of Jewish values. Those are midot. I need to engage the religious other, not because it goes beyond my understanding of Avodat Hashem, but because my avodah requires me to do that. One of my other teachers, Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, a great Jewish innovator, said, the only way to get it together is together, right? And so what does it mean that a child grows up proudly engaged in the rhythms of Jewish life, and as a part of that, he or she is involved in conversation, in acts of goodness, in dignified disagreement with people from other walks of life? And thank God for pioneering figures like Heschel and Sacks. And the dignity of difference is such a beautiful, such a precious notion, and it requires cultivation. from an early age onward. And we're all works in progress. I think that's the other piece that I wanted to add to the conversation about teachers and heroes and sheroes. Just as I want to encourage our students to understand that there are questions that abide, to communicate to them too that we have those questions. I don't know why the world is created as it is. There are certain mysteries that are beyond me. And yes, I feel like it is ennobling to be a participant in Tikkun Olam, but why and when bad things happen to good people, I don't have a satisfactory answer for. And I often feel like I want to provide a ready-made and full answer to students, but I think it does them a disservice. And in my trial and error, and there's more error than trial, I have found that children usually have a greater capacity to hold tensions than we think they might.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There's a lot of challenges there to think about for sure in terms of how to have, as you say, a deep, rich, what did you call it, a thick Jewish education, and also be simultaneously engaged in the world. Thank you. So just as we don't have all of the answers, we also don't have all of the questions. And our panelists generously offered to give us a few more moments of their time to answer a few questions that might be out there. So I will at this point turn to Bailey Daniels, who's in the background, I think is collecting questions or will do so. So if anybody who's watching or has joined us and would like to ask a question, the way to do it is to click on that little box that says Q&A and put your question in there, and then Bailey will send them to me. And let's see if there are any questions. There was a lot discussed, a lot talked about, and so perhaps people are just absorbing. But let's see. Let's give a couple minutes for people to put their thoughts together and see if I hear some people might be typing. So we'll give them a moment. While we're waiting, I do want to once again thank all of you so much for joining us in this conversation. That was incredibly rich and dynamic. I think next time I'll ask fewer questions because there was just so much really amazing discussion there. Luckily, we did record the event, so I can go back and listen to some of your responses. Okay, I'm just going to see if I've got some questions here from Bailey. So what have we got here? Really interesting question. I love it. Wonder who asked that. So somebody wrote, the panelists have all spoken incredibly insightfully about why Jewish teaching is important and how to be a great Jewish teacher. The other side of Jewish education is Jewish learning. How do we become good Jewish students? How do we orient ourselves to be the best learners we can possibly be? Wow, that's a beautiful question, and presumably maybe sent in by a student. Who out there would like to pick that one up? How to be a wonderful Jewish student? Rachel?
It is a great question.
Yeah.
Really, there's a number of layers to that. So the idea that a lot of what we've talked about tonight is that Jewish learning occurs every moment. It occurs in the things we see. It occurs in everything we're reading. It occurs in the newspapers we read. It occurs in the conversations we have. The question about directing that learning, the idea of, so how do I see those moments? How am I the student of Jewish learning that will open this up for me? And that's it's the rabbis sort of approach it in two ways. One is a broad view, exposure, the idea of hearing multiple voices, multiple truths, multiple opinions, multiple interpretations. Hear it all, infuse yourself with it, have it come in. And then the navigation, the rabbis tell us, is find that one person. Create that one person. And the way that they say it is aseh lecha rav, create it. create that master for yourself that can help guide you and navigate through this. And when we look at it, we're looking for, when the rabbis tell us, you want someone who is like-minded enough to understand you, but you don't want someone who's always de facto agreeing with you. So the idea that it's enough of a spark when you think you found that person and you kind of feel like, yeah, I think they could get me. I think they could understand me. But again, you want someone who is going to spark that debate, not that sense of agreement. And it's really one of the most challenging things that Judaism presents us with, is this idea of searching for that person. And while that search goes on, the broad view is taking place. So it's happening simultaneously. The idea that I do want to hear lots of Jewish voices. I want to hear lots of opinions. I want to be the student that reads 5 newspapers, the student that, you know, gets all of the information I can get into me as I search for that guiding person that is going to challenge me and help me organize all of this. So it's a huge question because it is a huge undertaking. It's a life journey of being the student. And of course, Judaism tells us, but you're never just the student, because you're always the student and the teacher. And when you are the teacher, you're always the teacher and the student, because it's a symbiotic relationship that's being created. So, you know, the short answer, I guess, would be to say, first of all, lots of exposure, hear lots of voices, lots of interpretations, lots of views, and continue to search for that partnership of master and disciple. Create that person for yourself, because even if they're going to say, no, sorry, my plate is full, I can't, or, you know, I'm intimidated, or I don't want that response, well, you continue at them, because this is a shaping thing that takes place between the teacher and the student.
Thank you, Rachael. That's beautiful. I mean, Aseh Lecha Rav is one of the things I tell myself all the time. I mean, it's you had a word for those things that you put in front of you. What did you call those? Certain phrases that you kind of use as a guiding principle.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I don't remember the word, that I know what you're referring to.
Yeah. Anyway, it's one of mine for sure. Rabbi Benji, I think, wanted to add to that response. It's a great question. So
yeah, I think it's a really phenomenal, important question. And I think what it does is it asks the student the question. It says, how do I become a good student? And playing off the important Mishnah that Dr. Rachael and Greg both quoted, Aseh Lecha Rav, there's a beautiful Hasidic answer that says, Aseh Lecha Rav traditionally means make for yourself a teacher. But if you read the words Aseh Lecha Rav, it's make yourself a teacher. I.e., at the end of the day, you know, especially in today's day and age, I don't believe, and by the way, halachically, this is true as well, in the sense that there can be different halachic areas, areas of Jewish law, that you can have different teachers. I can have a teacher that I want to go to that's an expert in kashrut, and a different teacher that I want to go to that's expert in Mussar. And of course, they need to be congruent across both. But there may be teachings in one that relate and resonate with me more than the other. Aseh Lecha Rav, make yourself into a teacher, I think is critical, because it's about actively being involved in the learning process. Don't just rely on someone else that's teaching for you to be able to learn. That's just step one. And I think Aseh, it's an imperative, it's a tzivui, because you need to go out and find it. And obviously, we don't have time to go into it for a long time, and I'm giving a very short edition, but the hemshech, the continuation of the Mishnah, is also true. Aseh Lecha Rav, you should find yourself teachers and make yourself into a teacher. The next stage is ukaneh lecha chaver, and you should acquire for yourself a friend, i.e., you need to create an environment, an ecosystem that is conducive to your learning. Don't think that you can do this completely on your own. This is a beautiful example of that. There's so many people around the world that are connecting through this learning, and we need to find people. When I was connecting more to my Judaism, I found a friend, literally, that we went on this journey together. And then finally, you should judge everyone favorably. Once it starts with yourself, then it emanates to the family, to the to the friends. It can't stop there. You have to go kol adam, every single person, all of humanity, because once you learn and become that teacher, it needs to continue to emanate in these concentric circles till it affects everyone and everything. And also our learning comes through our friends, comes through those around us, and kol adam, they come from everyone around us.
Thank you very much, Benji, for those additional thoughts on that really, really excellent question. So yesher koach to whoever asked that question. Given time, I think I'm just going to ask one more question. It's also a really fantastic question, and in many ways goes back to how we started this evening, which was the imperative for parents to respond to their children's questions. I'm just going to paraphrase the question a bit, but it's something along these lines. The person says that children will never be convinced about Judaism for life unless their own parents are committed to the Jewish learning process themselves. The Board of Jewish Education needs a curriculum for parents. How would people respond to that? What kind of learning is it important, I guess, or in what way do parents need to engage in the learning process or in the Jewish educational process to really support their children's learning? Who'd like to pick that one up? Anyone before Rachael?
Please.
Okay, Rachael.
No, Daniel, go ahead. I was
Rabbi, sorry, I didn't see any other head. Rabbi Splansky, did you want to speak to that one? Or
I was pointing to Daniel.
I was going to ask Daniel if nobody else raised their hand, but
he did raise his hand.
Oh, you did? Oh, I didn't see. Okay, Daniel, you're on. Dan, please, you're on.
I couldn't agree more. Judaism isn't just about learning text and learning facts and learning history and learning text. It is about the way we live and the choices we make, and empowering young people to have the agency, which is the knowledge, the attitude, the aptitude to choose a Jewish life for themselves and to lead a Jewish community into the future. And that has to come not just from what I'm going to crassly say, outsourcing Jewish education outward, but it has to come from the insourcing as well. I started saying one of my responses earlier that I think we could characterize the history of Jewish education in the 20th century as to some degree being outsourcing. Like we did build schools and shuls and camps and JCCs and all these places for Jewish education to happen there. And in the 21st century, I think what we've started to do, and this isn't it's clearly not a dividing line, but PJ Library and the Jewish Grandparents Network and learning programs for adults and One Table, which is helping emerging adults create Shabbat dinners for themselves and for their community, are very much about bringing it into our own homes and thinking about how we create an environment where we are able to educate our children. And I think that has to happen in parallel, because if they are two islands or two ships unto themselves, we miss what we actually need, which is the coming together of the home, and homes today, especially in Toronto, are multi-generational, and the community with these institutions where we do teach our kids outside. So that is critical, but it has to be a full endeavor, not simply a curriculum for the family, for the parents. It has to be, how do we live what we are teaching in schools?
Great, thank you, Dan. I think that's a really great response to that question. And I think probably a good place for us to conclude our conversation. We could keep talking into the far reaches of the night as the rabbis did, but we could maybe save that for Pesach, where it is the tradition to do so. Before we all depart, I do want to offer some thanks. First of all, thank you again so much to all of the panelists who gave us so much wisdom and thoughtfulness. And thank you kindly for being here tonight. This was really a wonderful integration. Someone mentioned that word earlier, of so many different ideas and thoughts. And one of the things I just love about being able to ask these questions is you just never quite know what answers you're going to get. And I took away at least 20 nuggets of just wonderful learning that I'm going to take with me. So, toda rabba lekulam. I also want to thank a couple other folks. First of all, Devorah Goodman of the Lola Stein Institute, who first brought to my attention the article by Dr. Rose concerning Rabbi Sacks's insights on education. That was the kind of jumping off point for tonight's panel. To Bailey Daniels and Jamie Carson of the Toronto Heschel School for their work in making tonight's event happen. And to all of the teachers, parents, and leaders in all of our schools and in the community for whom Jewish education matters the most and who dedicate extraordinary time and commitment to Jewish education and who ultimately derive deep pleasure and satisfaction from the learning that happens in our school. So thank you all. In conclusion, I'd like to leave you with a few words from Rabbi Sacks's book, A Letter in a Scroll. Rabbi Sacks wrote, and this was in fact echoed in a number of the comments made tonight, I cannot tell my children and my grandchildren what they should be. Only they can make that choice, and I wish them blessing in whatever they decide. But I can tell them where we came from, where our ancestors were traveling to, and why it was important to them and their children that they should carry on the journey. This is our story, unfinished yet, and there is a chapter that only they can write. So may we all be inspired to teach and learn and continue in this very important project of Jewish education in strength and in good health. Erev Tov, everybody. Thank you very much.
Amen.
Thank you for joining us. Amen.
Yeah. Thank you, Greg.
All kavod.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. It was wonderful.
Thank you all
being
so
with you.
much. Really great to have you all here, and thank you for joining us from weird hours of the day in the middle of not the easiest time for any of us in this world. So really, it is appreciated that everyone contributed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Toda rabah. Erev Tov, folks.